And today people are always under stress, and it is especially so in Japan. A lot of people work even on weekends.
Right.
There's stress of commuting,
Yeah.
stress at the workplace, etc. It's probably not a surprise that depression is now considered a social problem in Japan, not just a problem for an individual. And this problem is compounded by the tendency for the doctors to diagnose you as
early,
depressed.
Yeah.
Even when you're just showing small, early signs of depression, and gives you that medication, and that is making those patients sort of dependent on drug, and never find a way to get out of it.
Right.
Do you think in that kind of situation in Japan, do you think mindfulness is effective, useful? And especially in terms of preventing people from getting depressed.
I don't know enough about Japan and the Japanese psyche, so to speak, if I could put it that way, to really be able to sense what the response in Japan would be to really the revolution that I'm talking about, this mindfulness revolution, that's rotation in consciousness that requires really waking up. I mean, that's what it's about, is wakefulness. That's another word for mindfulness, is wakefulness. The stress is enormous. I understand that it's enormous in Japan. I understand it's got some social, element to it. And I also understand that self-distraction is enormous. People are constantly on their devices, constantly self-distracting, constantly addicted to one thing or another, including alcohol, cigarettes, pornography, all sorts of things, gambling. And then, of course, a lot of that is because of unhappiness. So it's easy to fall into depression. It's easy for doctors to say, oh, you're depressed? Here, take this. You're anxious? Here, take this. And so then you start to treat yourself with medication, when it might be much more valuable to treat yourself with meditation. There's only one letter difference in those two words in the English language, and there's something very powerful about it, because medicine and meditation are very, very deeply linked, from not just the Latin, where the both words come from, but from the deep Indo-European roots at the core of European languages. So medicine and meditation go together. Now, you could see the cultivation of mindfulness as preventive medicine. If you're busy being healthy, your body doesn't have time for disease. It doesn't have time for depression. It doesn't have time for anxiety, and it will figure out much more effectively how to deal with the very real stresses and pressures in our lives, and to live a happy life. I mean, if you are always working, are you living to work or working to live? This is a profound philosophical question. How do we find some kind of balance? The technology is driving a huge amount of our stress. Some companies don't allow their employees to turn off their smartphones on the weekends or even on vacation. So you always have to be on. Well, if you're on 24/7, you're not a human being, you're a computer server. Okay, so this is a kind of life change that the technology is driving, where we don't have good answers for these kinds of things. But I do think that, first of all, multitasking has been shown by science, neuroscience, psychology, to not work at all. It degrades everything you think you can do simultaneously with other things. Every single one of those things is performed at a poorer level. So the multitasking is just not possible. Okay? Doing one thing at a time, that requires what we talked about before: focus, attention, how to stay focused. The mind wanders, noticing your mind is off, bringing it back. Okay? And then that muscle develops, then you can have more stability, more equilibrium, and then more mental balance, more emotional balance. Then you may decide, to change how you work, to change your work, to find what they sometimes call work-life balance. But this really hinges on what I said earlier about the real practice of meditation. The real practice of mindfulness is how you live your life from moment to moment. So yes, I mean, it can be very, very stressful, and I'm not saying there's some kind of magical solution to that. If you can't change jobs easily and you have to, live in the city all week by yourself and then go back to your family on the weekend, that is not a great prescription for a totally happy, integrated life. So how much freedom does one have to make choices of that kind or another? I think Japanese society has a lot of, looking at itself and a lot of questions about what might be alternative ways to take the richness in this society and the beauty in this society and the creativity in this society and have it work so that it works for people, so that life works and work works for people, as opposed to just one endless source of stress until you drop dead. So these are big, I would say, national challenges, but there's no question to my mind that mindfulness needs to be part of the conversation, because if not, there won't be any awareness of alternatives. Now, I will tell you, again, not knowing anything about Japanese society, in the UK, for instance, in the parliament, hundreds of members of parliament, both on the House of Commons side and the House of Lords side, have gone through an 8-week training program in mindfulness, and they're loving it. There's a waiting list to get into this mindfulness training program. And, imagine a legislative body that is actually cultivating awareness. That might bring the political decisions and the economic decisions and the creation of laws and so forth, that might bring it onto a kind of entirely new plane of greater societal wisdom and compassion. And they're looking at deep questions of like whether even the gross domestic product is the right way or the only way to measure well-being of a society. And they're moving more in the direction of looking at like the gross happiness index, that of course Bhutan, which is a tiny little country, is using. But now macroeconomists in England, people who are members of the House of Lords and the House of Commons, are looking at just those kinds of things. And they are writing an all-parliament, all-party report on mindfulness that's going to become a document. And the title of that document is going to be A Mindful Nation, talking about the UK. But they stole the title from a book that an American a congressman, Tim Ryan, who's also a colleague and friend and student of mine, wrote, called Mindful Nation. So in the US and in the UK at least, and I think also in Sweden, the parliamentarians practice mindfulness. This is kind of revolutionary. I mean, and don't forget, the UK doesn't have a 1,000-year history of Dharma. The US doesn't have a 1,000-year history of anything. Sweden doesn't have a 1,000-year history of mindfulness. Japan does. What's it going to do with that? Maybe nothing. Maybe it will be a light unto the world, as the Buddha originally said. But again, not about Buddhism, but about a kind of universal expression of Dharma wisdom that's grounded in the ancient traditions, but that is not only universal, but it's utterly modern. It is adequate to the kinds of anguish, to the kinds of dukkha, to the kinds of dissatisfaction that we're living with moment by moment and day by day in this modern era. I am tremendously optimistic about that, by the way, and I'm tremendously optimistic about you and Junko Vartkin forming this Institute of Mindfulness, Japan Institute of Mindfulness, because your own vision is similar to mine, and I think it's a very optimistic and brave, courageous stance to try to find a new way to introduce these kinds of principles and practices into Japanese society in ways that will not be dumbed down and degraded. That's the big risk. And, I have every hope that you'll be totally successful.
Thank you.